How's it going, my bakers? Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome back to another sweet treat recipe. Today we're making silky smooth lime tarts, so let's go to the kitchen and get started. As soon as I posted my lemon tart recipe, which was hugely popular, I started working on a lime version. The process here is quite similar, but I have streamlined the method. You could say that this one is slightly easier to make, and I'm working with a different sized tart case this time, a smaller one, because a man can only eat so many tarts. I am very happy with the result here. Once again, we have perfectly baked, perfectly level pastry, the bottom isn't soggy at all, and the filling is as smooth as it can be. The lime flavor really pops here, so let's just get right to it and see what exactly we need to make this. Starting with the pastry, we'll need some all-purpose flour, some icing sugar, some cold butter cut into cubes, we'll need some salt, the zest of 1 lime, vanilla paste, a couple of egg yolks for the pastry mix, and a whole egg, which will be used to make glaze for the pastry. For the filling, we'll need the juice and zest of 4 limes, we'll need some double cream, use the fattiest cream that you can find, we'll need some white sugar, some eggs, and we'll need one more ingredient that slightly feels like I'm cheating, some green food coloring, because the lime juice and zest is just not green enough. Without the food coloring, the filling of the tart will be more yellow, just like the lemon tart I posted earlier. And as for the equipment, we'll need a tray, a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a brush, a fork, which I may or may not use, a temperature probe, a fine grater for the lime zest, a spatula, a rolling pin, a whisk, a small pot, which we'll use to make a double boiler for warming up the filling. You need to be able to fit your mixing bowl over it. We'll also need a sieve for sifting the icing sugar, because it's always lumpy. There's a couple more things we'll need. Some baking paper, and of course we'll need a tart case. As I mentioned in the beginning, this time I'm using a smaller tart case, but it is deeper though, and the removable bottom is essential. This tart case is about 8 inches or 20 centimeters across, and about 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters deep. If you don't have a tart case like this, but you do have a tart case the same size as my previous video, then increase the amount of all the ingredients by 1/4. Okay, a couple more things. We'll need a jug for pouring in the filling. And finally, we'll need some baking rice or baking beans for blind baking the pastry. Someone in the comments of the previous video suggested using another tart case to hold the pastry down. So if you have 2 tart cases of the same size, that might be an option. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's start by making the pastry. In a large bowl, combine the flour, the salt, and the cold cubed butter. Make sure it's cold, it must be solid. We need to break this butter up one by one, rub it into the flour, make it nice and crumbly. If you're going to use soft butter, this is just going to turn into a dough way too soon. So coat all the butter cubes in flour, then one by one, break them into 4 and then break them into even smaller pieces. Keep going until the mix is nice and crumbly and nice and uniform. It should look like this, it kind of resembles wet sand. Okay, let's put that to one side and make the second part of the mix. First things first, sift the icing sugar, get all the lumps out. The reason for using icing sugar in a pastry is because it's nice and fine. It will ensure that the pastry is nice and delicate and not crunchy. To the sifted icing sugar, add the lime zest, the vanilla paste, and the egg yolks. Now grab your whisk and whisk this to a smooth paste. Once that's done, combine the dry ingredients with the wet ingredients. Then grab your dough scraper and mix until there is no dry flour left. You can finish the mix by hand, just to ensure that everything is nice and smooth. The pastry shouldn't be sticky at all, but it should be quite loose, and that's exactly what we want for a nice light pastry base. This is exactly what it should look like. But because it's so loose, we can't work with it yet, we need to chill it down. But before we chill it down, we need to remove 20 grams of it. I mentioned earlier that we'll be using the whole egg for glazing. What I meant was that we'll mix the egg with some of the pastry to create a glaze. This will be used to prevent the filling from soaking into the pastry and making it soggy. So whisk it up until it's smooth, leave it on the side for later. Okay, now we can chill this thing down. And to speed up the process, and to make our job easier, come rolling time, shape the pastry into a flat disc and wrap it up in cling film. Now pop this in the fridge and leave it to cool down for around 1 hour. During this time you can start preheating your oven, 170 degrees Celsius with a fan on. And that is 340 degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends. If your oven doesn't have a fan, then go with 190 degrees. Or 375 Fahrenheit. Okay, the pastry is nice and set, but before we start rolling it out, let's prep the tin. Just brush it lightly with some butter. It might not be totally necessary, but it's insurance. To roll the pastry out, we'll use 2 large sheets of baking paper. Place the pastry between the sheets of paper. Get your tart case, visualize how far you need to roll this. and then grab your rolling pin and start gradually rolling it out. You really don't want to rush this. Go nice and slow, don't press too hard. If you press the rolling pin too hard into the pastry, it may break. Of course it's not the end of the world, but you want to avoid that. This pastry of course is quite forgiving, it is easy to fix. Once you rolled it out a bit already, measure it again against the tart case. Because this tart case is so deep, I decided to roll it out just a little bit more. Okay, this seems just about right. Now here's my preferred way of getting the pastry into the tart case. This can be quite tricky, but I think this method works quite well. By the way, if your kitchen is very hot and your pastry is getting very soft real quick, place it back into the fridge for a couple of minutes. Okay, here's my method. Place the base of the pastry case into the middle of the pastry. Then take the ring and try to center it over the top. Now slide one hand underneath the base and then holding on with the other hand, flip it over quickly in one smooth move. Now peel off the paper and the pastry is in the case. All you need to do now is make it conform to the shape. Lift up the side of the pastry gently and push it down into the corner. You want to fill all the little gaps of the pastry case. It will feel loose, it will feel very fragile, but don't worry about it. If it does break, it's not a big deal. Just take a spare piece and simply patch it up wherever needed. Now this tart case does not have a lip, so I'm not going to trim the pastry. If I trim it off, it might just fall inside as it bakes. If your tart case does have a lip, then you can trim around it. I'm leaving it on just in case. The edges will be trimmed after baking though. Okay, in my lemon tart video, I decided to poke the bottom of the pastry with a fork so it doesn't puff up. But this time I skipped it and it worked just fine, so there's no need to do it. But we definitely need to weigh this pastry down to bake it. So take a piece of baking paper, scrunch it up, then unfold it, and then gently mold it to fit the shape of the pastry. And you have to scrunch it up. If you don't do it, it's not going to fit properly. Okay, one last thing before baking, fill her up with some baking rice with some baking beans. And give them a good press so they fit the shape. Okay, let's bake this thing for 20 minutes initially. Remove it from the oven after 20 minutes and then carefully remove the baking paper with the baking rice or the baking beans or whatever you're using. It's best to use a larger piece of paper so you don't end up with a bunch of rice in your pastry. Okay, now comes the glazing part. You want to whisk it up one more time before you use it so it's nice and smooth. Then take a brush and brush the glaze over the whole surface, even the edge that you're going to trim off later. Now we can get this thing back into the oven for another 10 minutes of baking. After this, it should be done. Now be extra careful when lifting up and moving it. It is quite fragile, as you can see. I almost broke off a little bit too much of the left edge there. Okay, as soon as it comes out of the oven is the best time to trim the edge off because it's still nice and soft. Just take a knife and follow the edge of the tart case. And there you have it. That's how I make a perfectly baked, perfectly level sweet pastry case. You can certainly use this recipe for other applications. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Now you want to turn the oven down to 100 degrees Celsius, and that is only 210 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's move on to making the filling. In a large bowl, combine the sugar, the eggs, the lime juice and the lime zest, and the cream. And of course the little cheating ingredient, that'll be the green food coloring. If you want to use it, if you don't want to use it, just leave it out. Give the mix a good whisking, and then get your cooking pot ready with a little bit of water. You want to ensure that the water doesn't touch the bottom of the bowl. If it does, you'll end up with lime flavored scrambled eggs. Set the pot on medium to high heat and get the water boiling. At this point I realized I need a few more drops of food coloring to make this nice and green. Oh, and before anyone says, Charlie, there was 6 eggs in the video, only 5 eggs in the recipe. Yes, I know. I did make more filling than I needed, and then I reduced the recipe so you don't have to waste your ingredients. Okay, place the bowl over the pot of boiling water and heat the filling to 60 degrees Celsius or 140 Fahrenheit. Whilst the filling is heating up, place the tart case back into the oven. Just don't forget that the oven temperature needs to be turned down, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, stir the custard gently until it reaches correct temperature. I was using quite a small pot, so it took me quite a while to warm it up. It was around 12 minutes in total. The reason for warming up the filling is to shorten the baking time and to ensure that it sets nice and evenly. If you have a blowtorch at home, use it to get rid of the foam on the surface of the filling. If you do that, it will come out extra shiny, it'll be like a mirror. I forgot my blowtorch at work, once again. So my tart wasn't as shiny, but of course it still tasted the same. Also, if you want it to be extra smooth, you can pass it through a sieve to get rid of the lime zest. Okay, next step, pour the filling into the jug, then head over to the oven and gently pour it into the pastry case. Try to fill it up as much as possible. There might be just a little bit left over. The filling should be baked ideally at 70 degrees Celsius, but you don't want to measure it, you'll make a hole in it, it'll look ugly. If you bake it for 30 minutes, it should be done. One good way of checking it is to shake the oven or shake the tart itself. If it wobbles just a little bit, it is done. But don't worry if it's completely set, it'll still be nice and smooth. Okay, now we need to let this cool down completely. And I like to pop it in the fridge straight away for around 2 to 3 hours. And it's not very big, so don't worry, it's not going to warm your fridge up. Right, a couple of hours later, we can take it out and remove it from the case. The best way of cutting this is by using a warm knife. Run your knife under hot water, then wipe it dry, and do that before every cut. That way, the cuts will be nice and clean. And there you have it. That's how you make an awesome lime tart. The pastry is nice and light and crumbly. The filling is super smooth. It's bursting with lime flavor. This is like the ultimate summer dessert. Even though it seems like a lot of work, it's pretty quick to make. The hands-on time is not that much. We spend more time waiting for it to cool down than actually making it. For me, the best way of serving this is with some unsweetened whipped cream, some fruit or some berries. But you of course can serve it however you like. So what do you think of this lime tart recipe? And have you tried my lemon tart recipe? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.